Hello and welcome to the nervous system. Before we get started, just to get us all up to speed, you will find your exam 3 or the nervous system objectives, note packet, and lots of other diagrams that I've added and included in the lecture 3 folder, in the lecture materials folder in our content tab, excuse me. All right, so everything you're going to need is right there for you, and I strongly recommend that you get that kind of organized. The lecture packet is the same as I gave to some of you before we left, excuse me. But if you lost it, if you need one, it is in the lecture content folder for you. Okay. So the nervous system. We touched on it a little bit with the muscular system when we talked about our neuromuscular junction. That's literally the tip of the iceberg. We're going to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. Now, let's talk about the basic functions. We could spend probably a year talking about all of the different functions of the nervous system. What I've done is kind of compile them into 3 broad lumps. Right? We have the sensory function, which is changes that occur within the body and the outside environment are detected. Now, I'm going to slam this home. If I had, if I had a nickel for every time I'm going to say this, I'd be a wealthy woman. But we have to remember that the sensory component also detects changes within the body, those homeostatic changes that we talked about way back in the beginning of the semester. It's easier for us to think about changes in the outside environment. It's easier for us to get our head around. When we feel hot, when we feel pressure, when we feel something happen to our body, that makes sense. But what we've got to realize is the majority of the sensory information is coming from the inside of your body. Right, so that's one broad category. We have the integrative. In the integrative, the nervous system interprets these changes. It says, okay, the O2 level in the blood has gone down. Why? Number one. And number two, what are you going to do about it? Well, the why may be simply, oh, that lunatic, she's out running again, so we got to do something about that. And what we're going to do is part of the motor function. This is how the nervous system is going to respond to these changes. They say, okay, we detect the sensory function has sent in a signal saying, whoa, oxygen level is low in the blood. Integrative says, oh, geez, what are we going to do about that? Do we need to do anything about it? Is it really, really low, or is it just a little bit low? Because if it's really, really low, we've got to do something. So we're going to send a signal through the motor system. However, if it's just a little bit low, it's just kind of sit back and wait and see, kind of keep an eye on it. And if it gets worse, then they'll do something about it. All right. Now, the motor function occurs in the form of muscular contraction or glandular secretion. Now, you might note that we're being somewhat vague here, and that is purposeful, because we've got 3 different kinds of muscles that are going to contract, right? We have our skeletal muscle, our smooth muscle, and our cardiac muscle. All of those are going to respond to some kind of a motor signal coming from the nervous system. Glandular secretion, again, lots and lots of different kinds of glands doing lots and lots of different kinds of things, That's how your body's going to respond to these changes. Now, don't be overwhelmed looking at this, right? This is one thing that I do have in our folder on Blackboard. This is from a text I had a while back. I'm going to use this. There is one in your textbook that you can reference on page 433. If you prefer this one, it is in fact in our lecture materials. So when we look at our nervous system, we've got all different kinds of ways to look at it. And you know me, I love a good outline. So what we're going to do is say, all right, how are we divvying up the nervous system? How is this going to be broken apart into functional units? How can I get my head around it? I keep saying that. It's kind of cracking me up because, the brain, head, get it? Anyone? All right. So you know me and my outline. What we're going to do is start with capital letter or capital I's, or representing 1 in Roman numerals, all right? So our first big division is going to be the central nervous system. Part of the problem with the nervous system, or one of the things that are going to be frustrating to you perhaps, is the nervous system, they love to abbreviate. Okay, central nervous system, CNS. So you say, oh, okay, I'll remember CNS. Not so fast, because they also like to use the central nervous system interchangeably. So you kind of have to be on your toes and realize that we're going to be bringing in abbreviations. We're going to be using the full names and vice versa. The other thing is that there's what will appear to be redundancy. It will appear that there's a lot of parts that are doing the same thing. They're not doing the same thing. The differences are going to be very, very subtle. So you're going to have to pay close attention. So, having said that, when we talk about our central nervous system, it only is made up of 2 parts, the brain and the spinal cord. If it's not the brain and it's not the spinal cord, it is not the central nervous system. Okay? And I've had students say, but what about? I think maybe. How about? The answer is no. If it's not the brain, it's not the spinal cord, it is not the central nervous system. Right? So it kind of makes it a little bit easier for you. Central nervous system is considered to be the control center for the entire nervous system. This is where information comes into that sensory component we talked about, right? The incoming information is going to be brought to the central nervous system, and that information is going to be integrated, figured out what are we going to do with it, and then, if necessary, the central nervous system will send out a stimulus to the muscles and the glands, kind of like that neuromuscular junction we talked about for the skeletal muscle system. And here we have Roman numeral 2. This is the second of our big divisions, right? So our first division is the central nervous system. The second division is the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral means not central, to the side. If you think about your peripheral vision, it's the vision you have towards the sides, right? The edges. So the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, right in the center. Peripheral nervous system to the sides, not central. Peripheral nervous system consists of nerves that emerge or branch from the brain and spinal cord. And this is where students get hooked up, right? They get kind of twisted up. They're like, oh, but it's coming from. Yeah, but it's not part of. Coming from and part of are 2 different things here, all right? These nerves carry impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system and from the central nervous system to the muscles and the glands. Receptors are any type of cell or organ that's going to be receiving information, getting information about the outside environment or your internal environment. Your eyes are receptor organs. Your ears are receptor organs. Inside, your blood vessels have chemoreceptors. Chemo being chemical. They're going to pick up changes in chemicals contained within the body. You're going to have an O2 receptor. You're going to have a glucose receptor. And their job is to monitor either the oxygen level of the blood or the glucose level of the blood and send a sensory impulse to the central nervous system. At that point, the central nervous system is then going to say, okay, we need to make a change. So a signal is going to be sent out through the peripheral nervous system to a muscle or a gland. There are 43 pairs of nerves that make up the peripheral nervous system. 12 are cranial nerves, and it should come as no surprise that those cranial nerves are going to originate from the brain, which again is part of the central nervous system. And there are 31 pair that will originate from the spinal cord, and these are referred to as the spinal nerves. Now, at this point, we're done with the central nervous system. Okay, that's the control center. Now, we've got to look more closely at our peripheral nervous system. So under Roman numeral 2, we're going to have the divisions of the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system. First, we have the afferent or sensory division. This is going to be incoming information, incoming from either the outer environment or the internal environment. The afferent is going to transmit impulses or information from sense organs to the central nervous system. Sense organs and receptor organs or receptor cells are the same thing. Cell bodies of these cells are located in ganglia near the spinal cord or cranial nerve origins. Now, hopefully you're going, what's a ganglia? Hold on. Ganglia are collections of nerve cell bodies found outside of the central nervous system. All right, so in a little bit, we're going to talk about the structure of a neuron, and neurons have cell bodies. If we have a clump of cell bodies that are located outside of the central nervous system, that clump of cell bodies is referred to as a ganglion for one or ganglia for multiple. Next, we have the efferent or the motor division. This is going to transmit information from the central nervous system to the effector organs, muscles or glands. Now, I talk about this, and it makes a lot of sense. What does a motor do in a car? What does a motor do in anything? It causes something to happen, right? It makes the car move. It makes the lawnmower move. It makes the dishwasher do dishwashery things, okay? So, the motor division, it stands to reason, will be the outgoing information, will be the information causing something to happen. Okay? The effector organs, when we contrast them to receptor organs, receptor are receiving, bringing that information in. The effector organs are causing an effect. They're causing something to happen. So they're causing a change to happen in muscles or glands. Now, this is a silly diagram that I leave in, right? But it kind of shows us our three categories or our three basic functions. This dude's sitting there looking at that water going, oh, golly, I'm really, really thirsty. Oh, look at that. Wow, that's a good looking glass of water. I'm really thirsty. That's the sensory input. That vision, looking at that glass of water, the receptor cells in his eyes are seeing the water, sending the signal to his brain going, oh man, that's a good looking glass of water. The integrative portion says, well, we should drink some water. If you're thirsty and you got water, it's a good looking glass of water. Let's have some water. Well, how am I going to make that happen? Well, we send out a signal to the biceps in the motor output. Okay, and that's going to allow the biceps to contract so that you get to drink your water. Okay, so we have our sensory or afferent division. We have our motor or efferent division, incoming, outgoing. The sensory division is very straightforward. It's information coming into the central nervous system. It's all of your senses, and that includes the senses that we're not familiar with. Those chemoreceptors, those pressure receptors, something called a proprioceptor. That's a receptor that allows your body to know where it is in space and time. Okay, all of those are internal, but they're all part of the sensory division. Okay, now when we look at our efferent division or our motor division, we have two broad categories. First is the somatic nervous system or the SNS. This is very straightforward. The somatic nervous system deals with one thing and one thing only, and that is impulses sent from the central nervous system to skeletal muscle. Not any other kind of muscle, not any other kind of gland, the skeletal muscle. The nerve cell bodies are located within the central nervous system. The axons, which we'll talk about, extend to the neuromuscular junction. So our presynaptic terminal that we talked about for our skeletal muscle contraction, that's part of this axon that we refer to. Next, we have the autonomic nervous system, or the ANS. Impulses are sent from the central nervous system to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and all kinds of glands. Sometimes this is referred to as the involuntary nervous system. It's responsible for conveying homeostatic information from the central nervous system to the various target organs or effector organs.